this next section, we are going to continue our investigation of the heart and talk about the way that the blood flows through the heart and the cavities that it passes through. Indeed, says the heart, also from Awkward Yeti. So, the heart's job is two parts. The first part is to get the oxygen into the blood. The second job is to get that oxygenated blood out to the rest of the body. So first, it's got to take in deoxygenated blood that has come from the body, get that blood out to the lungs, and then bring the blood back from the lungs and get it out to the body. Okay, so we call these, we have two circulations here. We have a pulmonary circulation, that's the circulation out to the lungs and back, and then we have the systemic circulation, which is the circulation out to the body and back. Okay, so let's first, before we get into exactly what's happening, let's just look at the structure of the heart. So this is a coronal suture through the heart. So I've taken the front of the heart off, and if you look, you can see that we've got a pocket here, a pocket here. That looks like a pocket at first, but it's actually part of this blood vessel that goes to there and there. We've got another pocket here and another pocket here. Okay, these four are our four cavities or chambers of the heart. The top two are called atria. Atria is the plural of atrium. The right, remember, this is the person's right, the person who owns this heart. So it's opposite our right. So we have a right and left atrium and a right and left ventricle. And if you look at the walls of the atria and compare those to the walls of the ventricles, you can see that these atrial walls are much thinner. These are still muscle, but there's much less muscle there. And you know, when you have less muscle, you can move with less force. And that's because the atria don't honestly do very much. The right atrium fills with blood, squeezes, and pushes the blood to the right ventricle. It's literally pushing blood from here to here. Okay? Left atrium fills with blood, pushes the blood to here. Like, they don't need to contract very much because they're not pushing the blood very far. Now, the right ventricle, here's the right ventricle, here's the left ventricle. Look at the difference in the thickness of these outer walls. You can see that the left ventricle is much thicker than the right ventricle, yeah? And that implies that the left ventricle can contract with much greater force, and that's correct. So, remember that the heart is going to send blood first to the lungs and then to the body. So which of these sides, which of these ventricles do you think is going to contract to push the blood to the lungs? Well, it's going to be the skinnier one. It's literally pushing the blood 6 inches to the side of your lungs. Like, doesn't have to go very far, right? The left ventricle, on the other hand, it has to be strong enough to push blood to the top of your head, to the bottom of your feet, even if you're doing a handstand or a backflip. So it needs to be much stronger, and it's going to have to eject blood at a much greater force. Okay, so remember that form follows function, and so when we look at the forms of things, we can tell something about the function. Remember this also because when you're looking at models of the heart or other pictures of the heart, you're going to see the heart from many different angles. And so it can be useful to remember these tricks for looking at the thickness of the outer walls of the chambers. If you can't figure out what you're looking at, if you look at the walls, you'll be able to orient yourself and figure out which is the right side and which is the left side of the heart. Okay, so blood flows into the heart through two big blood vessels, the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. Both of these bring blood into the right atrium. The superior vena cava carries blood from the head, the neck, and the arms. The inferior vena cava carries blood from the lower limbs and the inferior trunk, especially the abdominal cavity and all the digestive organs. The blood coming in here is high in carbon dioxide and low in oxygen. It's deoxygenated. Now, on all of these diagrams for the heart and the circulatory system, when you see tubes that are blue, those are carrying deoxygenated blood. When you see tubes that are red, they are carrying oxygenated blood. Your blood isn't really blue when it's deoxygenated, but it's a little darker than when it's oxygenated. That's because, remember, in the hemoglobin molecule, the oxygen binds to iron. When oxygen binds to iron, it turns a reddish rust color. Ooh, that's what rust is. So oxygenated blood is redder, and deoxygenated blood is darker and has kind of an iron color to it. Okay? All right. So we've got deoxygenated blood flowing into the right atrium. From the right atrium is going to contract. The increased pressure inside the right atrium is going to push the blood out through this valve into the right ventricle. The right atrium is then going to contract, the right ventricle, or relax, the right ventricle is going to contract, and it's going to push the blood out through the pulmonary arteries. The first of these is called the pulmonary trunk. A trunk is a blood vessel that then branches into named arteries. And trunks tend to be very short. So the pulmonary trunk comes first, and then the left pulmonary artery and the right pulmonary artery carry the blood to the lungs. Okay? In the lungs, CO2 moves down a concentration gradient out of the blood. O2 moves down a concentration gradient into the blood. And that is the pulmonary circulation. Okay, so the blood comes in here onto the right side of the heart, goes out through the pulmonary trunk, pulmonary arteries to the pulmonary circulation, comes back through pulmonary veins to the left side of the heart. Okay, hang on just a second. Some of you were asking, I thought arteries carried oxygenated blood. Mostly they do, but there are a couple of very important exceptions to that rule. What's important about arteries is they have thicker, more muscular walls than veins because they carry blood that is under pressure. So because these are carrying blood coming directly from the heart, the blood is under high pressure because the ventricle has just contracted to force that blood out of the heart. So the pulmonary trunk and the pulmonary arteries have nice thick walls. By the time the blood gets to the pulmonary veins, it's much lower pressure, and so it can travel in blood vessels that have thinner walls. So those are the pulmonary veins. Now this is the view of the heart from the back. Okay, this is the front, coronally sectioned with the front of the, so we can see into the chambers. This is the back of the heart. So you can see here is the left atrium. So there are two pulmonary veins, two, occasionally it looks like three right pulmonary veins, two on the left, three on the right, and that is because the right lung has three lobes and the left lung has two. These bring oxygenated blood to the left atrium. Okay, now you can't see much of the left atrium from the front of the heart, just this little part. Okay, so there it is. All right. From the left atrium contracts. That is going to cause increased pressure in the atrium, which is going to push the blood into the left ventricle. The left ventricle is then going to contract and force the blood out here into the aorta. Okay, so this big blood vessel here, it goes behind the pulmonary trunk to here. Okay, that's where the aorta starts. And the aorta has first this ascending part, then an arch, and then a descending part. So ascending aorta, aortic arch, descending aorta. The descending aorta is going to go all the way down through the thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity to take blood to those parts of the body. One quick note, there is a wall separating the two atria. It is called the interatrial septum. Remember that inter means between. And septum means wall. So it's literally the wall between the atria. The wall between the ventricles is cleverly named the interventricular septum. Thank you. All right. Now, atria, thin walls, do not make powerful contractions. The walls are still muscle, and they do have these ridges on part of it, mostly the front, and these are called pectinate muscles. Okay, pectinate means the teeth of a comb. I don't know, they don't really look like a comb to me, but I didn't name them. The ventricles, this is supposed to say ventricles, not just left ventricle. Hang on, let me just fix that right now, because what's more impressive than fixing something while you're recording? Okay, the ventricles make very powerful contractions. And so the ventricles actually have walls that have these big ridges on them, and these are called trabeculae carni. Trabeculae means beams, carni means flesh. So these are flesh beams with these ridges that enables really strong contractions without a lot of density and thickness of muscles, just thick in little portions. Okay, so we've got the pectinate muscles and the trabeculae carni. Okay, now these are different from these. Hang on, we're going to get to these. Okay, so that is the circulation of blood through the heart. Superior and inferior vena cava to the right atrium to the right ventricle to the pulmonary trunk to the pulmonary arteries. Back out to the lungs, back from the lungs in the pulmonary veins to the left atrium to left ventricle to the aorta. Please note, the blood is filling all of these cavities at the atria at the same time and the ventricles at the same time. So when we say, right and then left, we're talking about the path that any single blood cell would take. Okay, up next, we're going to talk about the valves that prevent blood from flowing the wrong way.